Don't forget, some things mustn't be forgotten. The shadow hunting me. I must hurry. My name is Daniel. I live in London at Mayfair. What have I done? This is crazy. Don't forget. Don't forget. I must stop him. Focus. My name is... I am Daniel.
When a wolf is caught in a trap, it will chew its own leg off so it could escape. I want you to ask yourself, would you be able to do the same? To cut off your own limb to survive? I bet some of you could, but most of you couldn't. This is because we don't have the same survival instinct as wolves or other animals. Another way we differentiate from wolves is they will kill and eat their own pack members just to survive. Would you be able to kill someone to survive? If we are honest with ourselves, most of us could not. But why not? Why don't we have the same survival instinct as a wolf? I'll tell you. It's our conscience. Unless you're a sociopath, everyone has a conscience. That little voice in your head telling you not to do something when you know it's wrong, that's your conscience. How far you can go before that voice starts talking, put those together with different scenarios, and you have your morals. Everyone sticks to their morals. It's hard to go against your conscience. For me personally, I have a nagging headache whenever I know I did something wrong that drives me to fix it. But sometimes there are circumstances where you will have to go against your morals, whether it be to save yourself or a loved one. But I want to pose a question. What happens when you deviate so far from your morals that just looking at yourself in the mirror makes you sick? Any excuse you make for yourself doesn't work, as you know it's a facade. What would you do if you couldn't live with yourself? Would you just give up? Or seek redemption? The game starts by having us wake up from a seemingly induced sleep, but some things are off. We can barely remember anything, only being able to recall that our name is Daniel, we are from Mayfair, London, and we are being haunted by a living nightmare. We see a trail of pink liquid. Following it seems to lead us somewhere, and as you follow it, you really get a feel for this game's atmosphere. You hear screams in the hallways, your screen shakes randomly, and ambient sounds will sometimes play. All of this coming together gives you a real sense of permanent uneasiness. The monsters in this game are not that scary. Mainly, it's the atmosphere. As this video continues, that'll become more apparent. But moving on, you follow the pink trail to a note left on the table. The note reads,
19th of August, 1839. I wish I could ask how much you remember. I don't know if there will be anything left after I consume this drink. Don't be afraid, Daniel. I can't tell you why, but know this. I choose to forget. Try to find comfort and strength in that fact. There is a purpose. You are my final effort to put things right. God willing, the name Alexander of Brandenburg still invokes bitter anger in you. If not, this will sound horrible. Go to the inner sanctum, find Alexander, and kill him. His body is old and weak, and yours young and strong. He will be no match for you. One last thing. A shadow is following you. It's a living nightmare, breaking down reality. I have tried everything, and there is no way to fight back. You need to escape it as long as you can. Redeem us both, Daniel. Descend into the darkness where Alexander waits and murder him. Your former self, Daniel.
we chose to forget? Who the fuck is Alexander of Brandenburg? And why do I have to kill him? And what do you mean a shadow is following us? All of these are questions both the player and I'm sure Daniel have, but for now we won't get answers till much later. As we look on the table with the note, we notice a glowing canister. Picking it up, we learn it's a jar of oil, one of the game's most important items as it's used to fill your lantern. Why is the lantern so important, you may ask? Well, besides not being able to see without it, there's a stat in the game called Sanity, and it drains from either being in the dark too long or looking at monsters. If your sanity gets too low, Daniel will actually start to hallucinate. In game, this is explained through Daniel actually having nyctophobia, which is a fear of the dark. Moving on, pulling a lever on the wall opens a bookcase leading to a hidden door that leads to the next area of the game. The entrance hall being the next area of the game, as we walk in, we get one of many flashbacks.
Alexander, is it inside the castle?
In a manner of speaking. Come, bring the lamp. You've been to the refinery, have you not?
I don't believe I have. Is it connected to the... what did you call it?
The inner sanctum. My most precious chamber, Daniel. And it lies well beyond the refinery. In fact, it lies beneath the very stone of Brennenburg.
This is actually one of many safe areas in the game, where there will be audio to scare you and a puzzle to solve, but no monsters that can actually kill you. This level serves as a tutorial on how to basically think to solve these puzzles. The way the next area is blocked off by some fleshy looking substance, so our goal is to find acid to burn it, and that's what this level is. With that, let's begin the game. Moving down the stairs, we see an entrance to the archives, a subsection of the entrance hall level. Going in and making a right, we can read a note that seems to be some sort of contract. I hereby offer my full attention and services to Alexander, Baron of Brennenburg. This contract will reign for a total of 3 years, when my freedom shall return to me. In addition, Alexander, Baron of Brennenburg, is to recommend my services at the Prussian royal court and within the sanctum of the Order of the Black Eagle. May no man break this seal. Wilhelm, House of Garrick. So we know Wilhelm is someone who had to help Alexander with something. This doesn't give much information right now, so moving on. After exploring the archives a little bit more, we can find what's labeled as Daniel's diary. These serve as the character building for Daniel, as they allow us to peer into his mind before the events of now. Reading this first one says,
16th of May, 1839. The unflinching African sun has continued to plague our expedition, making it impossible to dig until dusk. How Professor Herbert managed to find the location in these vast plains of nothingness remains a mystery to me. When I asked him about the tomb again, he told me about the legend of Tin Hanan, the mother of us all. An interesting story in its own right, but I can't help feeling there's more. Later that evening, we uncovered a passage beneath the dunes leading to a sand-covered stone structure. The professor was confident it was the tomb we sought and ordered the others to clear the way late into the dark, cold night. Tomorrow, I shall lead the men into the ancient structure, hoping to reach the burial chamber. No matter what the professor is keeping from me, the dig should yield something interesting to take back to London and the British Museum.
Moving on, we can find more oil and supplies. However, we encounter our first problem. The door to the history room is locked. We need to get in somehow, so we travel down the hallway and get a slightly frightening audio jump scare. Making a left, then going into this room, we find a second note of Daniel's diary.
17th of May, 1839. My hands tremble as I write. I feel a need to document my tribulation, for I fear that my memory will fail me if I linger. Today, I took some men and ventured into the dark, ancient passage we uncovered. Our torches burned faintly in the murky air as we slowly made our way underground. The men were superstitious and fearful. They argued loudly, and I felt their strange language getting to me. I mustered my strength and yelled at them to continue down the slopes and broken steps. The crudely carved passage confused me. It looked much older than the 4th century structure we had expected. The twisting path emerged into a great antechamber. The walls were lined with statues unlike any I'd ever seen. Despite their unearthly quality, I felt a strange familiarity toward them, which haunts me still. At the far end of the chamber, a great slab of stone sealed off whatever lay ahead. I gave the order to raise it, and as I pushed through the narrow space, the heavy stone suddenly dropped, sealing me inside. I was trapped.
So we learned Daniel made it into some sort of tomb but got trapped. Daniel himself must have made it out, as we know he's here, but just like Daniel, it feels like we really don't know anything, so right now it feels like I'm just grasping at straws. Backtracking the way we came, we can go into another map room where, walking up to the map, we get another flashback.
Much of the castle is old and hasn't been tended to for centuries. When the shadow arrives, it won't take long until things start falling apart.
We're just buying time anyway. Let's do what we can.
There isn't much to be done about the walls. We should reinforce weak structures. The ground will tremble and there's a risk everything will cave in on us, especially downstairs. Here, and there. Let's get the servants working on it.
So we learn that this castle's in bad condition. Fantastic. But we also hear of a shadow following Daniel. Could this be that living nightmare he was referring to? Moving on, we see how much merit that statement has to it, as the ceiling caves in right in front of us. Moving to our right, we see a note we can read, which is the final note from Daniel's diary talking about the expedition. It reads as follows.
17th May, 1839. After pounding the unforgiving stone wall for what seemed like an eternity, I realized it was hopeless. I was trapped. I fell to the ground, gasping for air, trying to focus. That's when I saw a faint blue shimmer. My weakened body was heavy to carry, but I managed to push myself toward the enchanting light. It was waiting for me. Enclosed in dark nothingness, I felt myself drawn to the mystic light. I reached out, closing it in my hands. The faint glow escaped my fingers and began to spark brightly and spirit me away, unlocking alien memories of spiraling towers, endless deserts, and impossible geometry. The next thing I can remember is the grating sound of stone being lifted, the voices of the Arabs pulling me to safety, and grasped firmly in my hands was the broken pieces of a most peculiar relic.
So Daniel was saved from the tomb, but what was that relic that was emitting that blue light? Whatever it is, it's clearly something extraterrestrial, as Daniel states it was showing him visions of otherworldly geometry. Whatever this relic was is now in Daniel's possession. However, it's broken into 6 pieces. I bet we can all guess what he's going to do next. But moving on. Coming to our senses, as you saw on the screen, we walk through the level, throwing a chair at the wall to break it down, allowing us into a locked room where we encounter our first puzzle. This puzzle consists of 3 peculiar-looking books in an order. Pulling them and such will open the door. The puzzle itself is fairly simple, so most people get through it pretty quickly. But before leaving the room, there is a note recounting multiple folklore stories from the area. They read as such. This story reaches all the way back to the time of the 30 Years' War. It is said that soldiers who abandoned their duty and got lost in the cold, dark woods were forever damned to roam the grounds. Their bodies, wrought by their tainted souls, have left them disfigured and empty of essence. Many have cited them over the years and described them as horrid revenants. They move silently through the woods, shying away from any beholder. They are called gatherers, as they seem to follow some ambition to steal living creatures. It is their prey which can be heard struggling inside damp burlap sacks dragged behind them, which reveal their presence. What dark scheme do they follow? The gatherers, soldiers who steal living people, stuff them in sacks, and take them somewhere. Very interesting stuff, raising a bunch of questions, such as where do they take them? However, there's much more notes to go over. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, the well-known erudite, visited Altstadt at the start of the 16th century. He resided in the local inn for a fortnight as he looked for the remnants of kingdoms past. During his stay, all the prominent members of society paid notice, and he is mentioned in many records of time. One day he went to investigate a burrow in the northwestern Glades, only to never be seen again. Heinrich is known to have passed away in Grenoble some 10 years later. He dismissed the notion of ever visiting Altstadt, which makes you wonder what really happened. Who was this mysterious man who visited this sleepy hamlet in the woods, and what happened to him? Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who is a real man, is most known for his work in the math and science field. However, he's also known for his work in the occult, which, if you don't know, is the belief of supernatural beings or entities. It says Agrippa came to Altstadt, which is the town that Brennenburg Castle is right outside of, apparently going to the northwestern outskirts, only to never be seen again. Agrippa being an occult writer makes me speculate that this was not some ordinary kidnapping, but more likely something supernatural. The last note reads, "The Baron of Brennenburg lives a reclusive life with his family at his castle nearby Altstadt, and like most of those of noble birth, rumors are inherited alongside with this title. Researching the history reveals little before the castle was consumed by a fire in the late 16th century. It was rebuilt by Alexander, a nobleman from the Rhinelands claiming the role as protector of the Prussian state. Alexander helped the region to flourish and remain popular throughout his presumed lifetime. The family has always been secretive when it comes to lineage and heritage, therefore the birth and death of Alexander and his offspring has never fully been recorded. This has fed the idea that the Baron is in fact the one and the same who came from the west over 300 years ago, lived through the time of the occupation, and joined the coveted Order of the Black Eagle, along with many of the great leaders of this country. Alexander, the same Alexander we're here to kill, is believed to be the same Alexander that rebuilt Brennenburg Castle 300 years ago. I mean, this could be pretty easily dismissed, as it could have been his distant relatives and noble families passing names down through generations isn't definitely anything out of the ordinary. But it's definitely not something that should be completely dismissed, especially with all the weird, otherworldly stuff that exists beneath the surface of this game. I wouldn't entirely dismiss it. After reading those notes, there's nothing left to do in this room, so we can leave. We enter one last room, giving us the key to the wine cellar, and there is a note on the table. This note reads, "Wilhelm and his fools have endangered my research long enough with their absent-minded handling of human vessels. The sheriff is keeping a watchful eye on the forest and is killing my trusty servants. It's just a matter of time until they follow the trail to Brennenburg. I need to lock Wilhelm and his men up to avoid further investigation from the public. The wine cellar will, therefore, be sealed off until the matter has been handled. Either the king's men leave, or they will starve. Whatever comes first. They can rot for all I care. Maybe I will feed them some wine. It would, in a sense, solve both of my problems." We can tell it's Alexander talking as he brings up Brennenburg Castle, but what does he mean by handling human vessels? Well, reading more into the note where it says the sheriff is keeping a watchful eye on the forest, we can clearly tell it's something illegal. It's most likely kidnapping, as why would the sheriff be looking in the forest if people are not disappearing? This also ties back to the gatherer's note from before, as they are seen kidnapping people. Do they perhaps work for Alexander? It's all a lot of speculation, but regardless, we see the draw off of any suspicion. Alexander decides he needs to seal Wilhelm and his men off as they are doing a bad job kidnapping people, and so he does just that. After making our way back to the entrance hall, we have our first run-in with the shadow. The walls turn into this fleshy substance and we get slashed. This is the living nightmare chasing us. Now, thankfully it's very slow, so we can just move past it. Entering the wine cellar, we get a flashback that just serves as adding more context.
Where did the Baron go?
Who cares? He left us enough wine to last us a lifetime. Or at least until tomorrow.
Just adding this coming back in. These bottles are actually components to the acid. You'll see they have like chemical names, and this is how we make the acid. Just thought I'd let you guys know.
What's happening? Oh, it feels like my chest is going to burst. Oh.
My God! Wilhelm, do something!
Except we're not getting out of here.
How can you say that? Alexander, you piece of shit! Let us out of here!
So it seems they died while Alexander locked them in the wine cellar. How could he have killed them? Well, reading the note on the table, we get our answers. My name is Wilhelm, House of Garrick. These are my final words, my confession and testament. 2 years ago, I was summoned to the Castle Brennenburg. As most of the aristocracy, I was curious about what this supposed knight of the order could want from me and accepted the invitation. The Baron was friendly and offered me a proposition. It dawned on me that the nature of the contract was sordid, and that the reason I was chosen was because of my follies of my past and not the honors I've been rewarded with during my time as a soldier. I was to kidnap healthy humans upon his slightest whim and do so without asking questions. In return, he would attest to my character at the royal court, advancing my position within noble society. I would like to claim that I struggled with this decision, but it came swiftly and I accepted it wholeheartedly. Ever since that day, I've brought men, women, and children to Brennenburg. I can't remember the numbers, but there were many, perhaps even 100, none of whom were ever seen or heard from again. Tonight the Baron invited me and my men down to the wine cellar to celebrate our work. I had my suspicions, but as we descended the staircase, he insisted and joined us in a toast. The wine tasted fine and my men drank without restraint. So begins the punishment for our sins. The Baron has locked us up and returned upstairs. Forgive me for what I have done. I was weak and fell into his diabolical ways. My men are screaming. Their skin has been pierced by their own tangled bones. I feel my insides revolt against their God-given nature. Blood has begun to pour from my eyes, and I can no longer... Reading this confirms so many things. First, Wilhelm and his men died via poison from the wine Alexander gave them. And two, Alexander does in fact kidnap people and brings them to Castle Brennenburg. Wilhelm even attested that the amount they have kidnapped is in the hundreds. Is it that far of a stretch to say that the gatherers are also kidnapping people for Alexander? While we now know Alexander is a rotten piece of shit, kidnapping and most likely killing all these people, we don't know why. After retrieving the last chemical, we make our way out of the wine cellar where we are attacked by the Shadow again. After dodging him, we make our way down to the laboratory to make our acid. While exploring the lab, we get another flashback which seems to be Alexander trying to make some sort of concoction.
There should be more cuprac. Let me see. And one part aquaforce.
Following the flashback, we can open a drawer and find the first of many memory capsules. These are some weird technology that holds Alexander's thoughts. Reading the first one says, "One day I will return. If it wasn't for the thought of you, my love, I wouldn't be able to go on. When I find myself doing terrible things, I take comfort in you. As long as I am able to think of you and long for a life together, I know I'm better than the others. I weep for them. They lust for power without restraint, where I only crave fair judgment and a safe return." So now we know Alexander wants to return somewhere where his family seems to be. There's nothing we can do with this information right now, so putting it aside, we look up on a table and find a note from Alexander that reads, "This is my third attempt to produce artificial vitae. The former compounds lack the potency I need, but I sense I'm close. Calamine and oripiment are given, and the cuprite binds them well. This time I will attempt aqua regia instead of aqua fortis, and hope it will produce a more even solution. The experiment was unsuccessful. The solution is highly acidic and proves impractical to put to any use except as a detergent. Organic tissue reacts especially violently to the solution and should be handled with the greatest care. I might be able to use the recipe, but I'm losing hope that I will find an alchemic solution to my predicament. Alexander is trying to produce something called vitae artificially. Whatever this compound is clearly has to do with him getting home, as it wouldn't be on the same table as a memory capsule. Vitae plays a much bigger role later on, but for now, just remember its name. The last thing on the table is a chemistry pot, which is the final thing we need to make our acid. Bringing it to the chemistry table, we can distill all the chemicals, put them into the chemistry pot, finally making our acid. Doing this clearly upsets the shadow as we hear the building shake and the shadow roar. Taking the acid, we bring it back to the fleshy barricade from before, where we use it to melt it, allowing us through to the next area. Passing through the barricade, we get a flashback of Alexander and Daniel seemingly having a conversation.
It sure is dark in here.
Yes, and there's a good reason for it. But you can light the lamp now if you wish.
What's the reason? For the darkness, that is.
Stay close. Be careful not to stray.
What's the reason? Why is it so dark?
Pay attention, Daniel. It's important that you keep going straight and make sure not to stray.
The flashback is more or less to teach a game mechanic, the mechanic being the more you're in the dark, the less likely the monsters are going to catch you. After exploring a bit more, we come across another one of Daniel's diary notes that reads,
22nd of June, 1839. It's been more than a month since my last entry. After the event inside the underground chamber in Algeria, Professor Herbert insisted I return to England. He said he didn't want to risk forfeiting the entire expedition lest I took a turn for the worse. An excessive decision, in retrospect, but I'm glad it turned out that way. I found my journal this morning in the haphazard collection of things brought home from Africa. Next to it lay the broken stone orb wrapped in cloth. I tried to assemble it, but couldn't. The pieces wouldn't fit together, as if they weren't from the same object. Could I have imagined it all? Was there ever a complete orb?
Following the expedition, where Daniel got trapped in the cave, Herbert sent him home as for liability issues. However, Daniel brought the broken pieces of that alien relic with him, which we now know is an orb. However, the pieces don't seem to fit together, seemingly causing Daniel to question if he had just hallucinated the whole thing. After a bit more exploring, we find a follow-up to Daniel's note in his diary that reads,
25th of June, 1839. I feel the need to continue this journal, even though it was intended for my journey to Africa. This must be something very important. I just know it. I've taken it upon myself to piece the orb back together, but it's been more difficult than one might think. The pieces are behaving strangely. They seem to change colour, shape, and texture, but ever so slightly. Yesterday, I took careful measurements and notated any significant markings. Today, I confirmed my suspicions. They were changing. I was terrified and rushed off to see the finest geologist in London, Sir William Smith. I approached the subject with care, and we discussed how rocks change form. He told me about the nature of glass, how it eventually collapses on itself, like ice slowly melting over the course of centuries. Smith eased my mind a bit, but I can't escape the feeling that these shards have otherworldly properties.
Now we know this orb is something otherworldly, as the shattered pieces of it are changing shape, color, and texture. Normal things don't just do that. Following this realization, Daniel takes the pieces of the orb to a geologist in London. The geologist's name, William Smith, of which he told him this type of thing is normal, but Daniel can't help but feel these pieces of this orb are something not from here. Following this, we can find a door that leads to the next area of the game, the Cellar Archives. This is the first area of the game where you can actually die. Your enemy here is a Karank, I don't know how to pronounce it, which is an invisible water monster that will only attack you if you're in the water. His location can be known by the water splashes you can see throughout. After parkouring around and flipping a few levers, we open a door that leads to a little room that has something called a hollow needle in it. This needle is very important as we can use it to lockpick the door right in front of us. After picking that lock and going through the door, we have the first chase sequence of the game where we are forced to run through the water as the Karank chases us. It's actually a pretty intense chase as the Karank does eventually become faster than the player, but if you make it, then you can enter the next area of the game, being the back hall. The back hall is pretty much a hub of this area. There's a bunch of lights everywhere allowing us to gain sanity quickly, along with multiple doors that branch off into different sections. The first one, of course, is the study. The study is also a safe room with no danger, so we'll just focus on the key points here. By going left in the first room, you can find a note on the table that reads, "To my most trusted student and friend, Johann Weyer. The most remarkable thing happened as I was traveling through the Prussian woods this summer. I finally found one of the orbs I've been looking for the last 20-odd years. It is as inexplicable as Heliodromus described it in the Hortus Conclusus. It was as it was told about, an underground Mithric temple crowned with an unearthly artifact. The orb was big enough to fill my cupped hands, and the texture was smooth and jagged, its color washed while rich. The contrast is not enough to describe its nature. It was an impossibility, an artificial paradox captured within a stone. I was staying in a nearby village called Altstadt, investigating one of the antiquated trails, when I finally found the cavern. I went inside, and suddenly I could verify the truth of these enigmatic artifacts. They were real. As you can understand, this is the most important discovery of my life, but it has also become my greatest fear. As I entered the underground chamber, I could feel that I was trespassing. Because of my curiosity, I did my best to fight these instincts and fetch the orb from its place. I scrambled out of the chamber and into the woods. I could sense something was following me. It bayed loudly as it closed in. This beast, this guardian of the orb, was relentless in its pursuit. I made my way to a nearby ravine, where I stumbled upon some men fishing in the lake. I tried to warn them as I passed, but fortunately they remained as I continued my escape. When I heard their cry of pain echo through the valley, I felt such a tremendous sense of relief, thinking I would be spared. Suddenly, a blue shimmering light engulfed me, and all the colors of the forest were washed away before my eyes. I kept running through the bleak surroundings. The trees had turned charcoal with black leaves of cinder, the ground covered in murky water. I pressed on through the drenched land as the glowing ember gave way to the rising wind and rained on me. I could hear pleading screams in the distance, and I joined in as pain and fear overtook me. I fell to the ground, gasping for air. This certainly must sound strange, but I had been carried miles away across the Alps to a grassy field outside Genoa. The Guardian had taken the orb from me, but still to this day I fear its return. Sometimes I lay awake at night listening for the howling cry I heard in the forest. It has been nearly a decade since that day, and I still haven't been able to write about the incident. The last time we spoke, you told me about your interest and ongoing research into the mythic orbs, and I realized I owed you the truth about my visit to Altstadt. Your friend and mentor, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. We get so much shit confirmed in this letter. First, Agrippa found his own orb at one point and said it was in a Mithric temple. Mithricism, also known as the Mithric Mysteries or the Cult of Mithras, was a Roman mystery religion centered on the god Mithras, who himself was the god of war, contract, and justice. This temple probably had multiple versions of it, one being in Algeria where Daniel found his orb. Following Agrippa finding the orb, he picks it up and describes it also as unearthly. After taking the orb out, he claims something was now following him. We know that he's talking about the shadow, the same thing following Daniel. Agrippa eventually runs into some fishermen, thinking he will be safe, but a blue shimmering light comes out. The same light Daniel described, of course, and it starts to warp the world around him. He could hear the screams of fishermen dying, the shadow probably killing them, and it's all too much, and he passes out. Agrippa describes waking up miles across the Alps in Genoa. The shadow had most likely carried him here, as he noticed the orb was gone. Agrippa felt the need to write this letter to his student, Johann Weyer, who, in real life, was also engaged in the occult, and he was actually accused of witchcraft. Following that letter, we move on and find a room covered in taxidermy dogs and dog anatomic sketches. We find a note from Alexander that reads, "After a short study, it is clear that the agitation found among humans can be found in the dog. Fear and pain induce stretch, which seems to trigger an endogenous response, causing the animal to burst with energy. I believe that the catalyst is produced in the brain. It is difficult to determine exactly where and what it is, but I sense it. It reeks of cosmic genesis. There is an inherent problem in harvesting this energy, since the creature is bound to die from the exercise. I must refine this process of torture to enable any real work to be done. More experiments must be performed, but it seems that only human beings are able to produce the amount necessary. It might be their ability to appreciate the severity of the process that ultimately augments their experience of terror." Alexander was torturing dogs for some sort of energy that is created in them when they are tortured. Could this be the vitae he was referring to before? Regardless, Alexander states that the torture is not effective, as the dogs are dying too quick, and states he needs to find a way to refine it. But he says one more interesting thing, and that's that human beings have produced the amount of energy necessary. This confirms Alexander tortures human beings. This is most likely why he kidnaps them, to torture them. We know nothing of this mysterious energy generated through torture, however, it'll all make sense later. Pushing forward, we find another note from Alexander. Further disappointment. The antiquarian's latest findings yielded nothing. I'm still unable to grasp the inner workings of life and its relation to the power I sense within it. I shall pursue more books on the subject, but I suspect it will be in vain. Since no research has been made in my particular interest, I must attempt to fill that void myself. Clearly humans emanate more of the energy I seek, but I hope animals will suffice, as they would prove less of a hassle to acquire. Talking even more about how animals don't provide enough energy, along with admitting he does kidnap humans to torture them. With that out of the way, we press forward, seeing an oddly weak window, and we know there's only one thing to do. Traversing outside the castle and coming back in through the window, we find another memory capsule of Alexander. This capsule reads, "When will it be my turn? Have I not shown restraint? My patience spans centuries. From where I came, mankind has not even wasted a breath, yet I bow to you. I have done so much for you, and I have gained nothing in return. Agrippa, I trusted you. It was I who, in all fairness, should have entered that gate." This confirms Alexander is immortal, stating his patience spans centuries, so that talk of it in the folklore of him coming 300 years ago was most likely true. However, it also shows Agrippa and Alexander were friends at one point, Alexander even stating he trusted him. It seems, however, Agrippa had betrayed him by going into some gate that Alexander wanted to enter. Going on, we find a table with a flow cycle rod, along with instructions on how to get an elevator working. This elevator is the acid equivalent of this level, basically being the final thing you do before you complete it, with each room advancing you one step closer. After getting that rod, you can make your way back, as you're now done with the study. However, once you make it back, the shadow screams again, showing he's even more upset. Following the study, we enter the next room, the storage room. Entering the storage room, it's very dark. Making our way through, we find multiple parts for a hand drill, as well as a note detailing to us how to make an explosive device. We use the hand drill to get the required liquids for the explosive, and after that, we can exit. And on our way back, we get an interesting flashback. That flashback will be more relevant later, so moving on. We pick up 2 flow cycle rods, and after that we're done here, so we just book it back. Following the storage room, we can now go fix the elevator, so it's time to enter the machine room. The machine room is a safe room and has a good amount of lore dumps. Entering the room, it's about what you'd expect inside of an elevator maintenance room. Tons of pipes and gears everywhere. This whole room is a puzzle that we must solve in order to fix the elevator. On our right, we can see our first piece of Daniel's diary that reads,
5th of July, 1839. Today I went to the university looking for answers. I was able to sneak into Herbert's office and pick up an address book along with some relevant textbooks. Professor Taylor at the Faculty of History was very helpful, and I managed to approach the subject of the orbs. The most interesting aspect was the prevalent trace they had left in our culture. The mythic orbs may, in fact, have inspired the globus cruciger, which so many royal regalia holds to this day. In ancient times, the orbs were held by priests as a symbol of the sun and its power. As I was leaving, I overheard a disturbing conversation. Sir William Smith, the geologist, was killed last night. Less than a fortnight had passed since I'd asked for his expertise. I know it's silly, but I can't help feeling responsible somehow.
It's important to note that I forgot to mention that Herbert, the man Daniel went on the expedition with, was also found killed. Now that this geologist is dead, it seems everyone connected to Daniel and the orb is turning out dead. Moving through, as you can see on screen, we have a lever puzzle. This thing is very easy to solve, and after finishing it, we're one step closer to being done with the section. Going down the staircase and into another room, we can find the second part of Daniel's diary entry that reads,
14th of July, 1839. I've read every book I can find on the subject. While rich in legend and hearsay, my knowledge is lack for the insight I crave. I've sent letters to many in Herbert's address book and received answers of varying importance. Today, I got one which differed greatly from the others. From a baron in Prussia. He said nothing about the quaint stories of priests in underground temples. He didn't even mention them. He simply wrote, I know. I can protect you. Come to Brennenburg Castle. Signed, Alexander. What am I to make of this? Protect me from what? Is someone after me? I looked up Brennenburg and traced it to the Prussian woods near the Baltic Sea. While being the least informative letter I've received, it causes me greatest distress and interest. As I write, my thoughts are drawn to my nightmares in which a most disturbing sound calls to me. A sound defying description. A voice from the void. The last few weeks have been awful, with so many sleepless nights dreading a repeat of those horrid dreams. Tomorrow I shall visit my physician, Dr. Tate, in hope that he can provide me with sedatives to help me sleep.
We learn that Daniel is now scared that whatever has killed the people he's in contact with is now coming for him, so he sneaks into the now dead Professor Herbert's office and takes his address book and starts writing letters asking for help. Alexander, seemingly knowing of the orb, invites Daniel, saying how he can protect him. This is how Alexander and Daniel met. Following this, Daniel decides he is probably going to go, stating it causes him a lot of interest. Finally, Daniel states he's going to his physician, Dr. Tate, to get sleeping meds as he's having indescribable nightmares. Following this entry, we have another puzzle where we just have to insert all of the flow cycle rods corresponding to their shape. Then there's one more puzzle in which we need to take cogs laying around and add them to the big machine in the basement. As we are carrying these cogs, we can't help but see another note on the desk. This note is Daniel's final entry in this section, and it goes as follows.
17th of July, 1839. How has this escaped me? They're all dead. Limbs scattered, heads split down the middle, their skin flayed as if boiled. I feel like I'm falling into myself. What's happening? Sir William Smith, Professor Taylor, now Dr. Tate. Is it following me? How can it not be? It's the damn thing I brought from Africa. Something is after me. I have no choice but to trust the Baron. He better know what he claims. If he is wrong, I suspect he'll regret it as well.
Dr. Tate is now dead in a very gruesome way, as Daniel describes, limbs scattered, head split down the middle, skin flayed as if boiled. With Dr. Tate's death, Daniel knows he's next, so he has no choice but to visit Alexander's castle. Moving on, we add the cogs to the machine, grab some coal to activate it, and turn it on. Following the activation of the elevator, the shadow is pissed, chasing us much faster this time, stabbing us multiple times. As we make it back to the back hall, we are done with this section, and now we can go down the elevator. As we make it to the bottom of the elevator, we get a flashback telling us this is the prison of the castle. God knows what we can find down here. This thought of existential fear is further exemplified by the fact that as soon as you enter the level, you hear a gatherer killing a prisoner. As you can guess, this is not a safe area. Progressing through the dungeon, hiding away from the gatherer down here, you can find many bottles of oil, as well as a hammer, that hammer being one of the quest items needed. Following the hammer, if you turn right and go upstairs, you find a chipper, which once combined with the hammer, makes a hammer and chipper, allowing you to break rusted locks on doors. After going downstairs, we find a room that triggers a flashback of seemingly a mother and a girl running from someone. But if we are having this flashback, does this indicate we were running with them, or were they running from us?
I don't want to leave without you.
Hurry, child. You must go. Find Gabriel, the Outrider, and tell him to alert the King's men.
No, you come too.
Please, we don't have time to make the hole any wider. Someone is coming. Hurry! I'll cover the hole with a bed. Everything will be fine. I promise you.
The flashback reveals the mother and daughter had a secret hole underneath the bed that, thanks to the hammer and chipper, we can now access. Going through the hole, we enter a tunnel system that was seemingly dug out by the mom and daughter. Making it to the end of the tunnel, we can remove the rocks on the wall, leading us to the next section of the prison. Running through this lower prison level, we see many naked dead corpses, as well as chains around. This is probably where Alexander kept people before he tortured them. Entering one of the rooms all but confirms this.
Hey! Anybody! Help! Christ! I don't believe this. Why? I mean, why? What did I do to deserve this? I mean, it can't be. Do I deserve this? It wasn't my fault. Why did he have to go in there? Don't go into burning houses. He should have known better.
Going to the right and down the hallway, we find another piece of Daniel's diary that reads,
2nd of August, 1839. I have arrived at the village of Altstadt. It's a haven in the midst of a vast forest and the last stop before my final destination, Castle Brennenburg. It's late in the evening, and the outrider, who has been with the coach since Bremen, advised me to wait until morning before I venture further. I've arranged for a bed at Der Müller, the village's only inn, and am now waiting for the sun to rise. I try to sleep, but as I close my eyes, I see the men who fell victim in London. My fear and shame forces me to witness the same scenes over and over. They are dead because of me.
Daniel feels extremely guilty, all the death caused by the shadow, as it is, in a sense, his fault. If he had never touched the orb, they wouldn't have died, and the guilt is clearly getting to him as he can't sleep. After picking up the note, we can hear another gatherer, which in the game they are called bruisers, so we will refer to them as that from now on. The bruiser will actually enter the room you were in before, so you are forced to leave it, the music being your indicator of how close or far he is. As we traverse down the hallway, we get more flashbacks. This one of Daniel talking to some little child and seemingly letting him leave. This angered Alexander with him saying, "Do whatever it takes," presumably to get this child back. Going down the hallway, we find a door with a lock that is noted to be in excellent condition, so our wood chipper won't work on it. We need to find a way to weaken it. We then see a second bruiser walk down the hallway, all the more emphasizing how many of them are here. Going to the left after that bruiser, we find the second piece of Daniel's diary, and it reads as such.
3rd of August, 1839. I feel like I have fled the world and all its worries. Brennenburg is a majestic creation perched upon a forest-clad hill with towers reaching well above even the highest pine trees. Following the winding road leading to the gates gives the impression of discovering something forgotten, as if journeying with Marco Polo to the hidden Xanadu. Alexander, the Baron, is a peculiar but gracious man. He seems well versed in worldly matters, and is not at all as eccentric as I assumed. My room is exquisite, and I'm confident that no hotel for miles could even hope to match it. As the sun sets on Brennenburg, its fairy tale varnish turns to an eerie gloom. Alexander's strange servants are never far away. They are a quiet lot, and their behavior could only be described as skulking. Alexander seems pleased by my presence. As he puts it, it seems like I got here just in time.
Daniel seems quite pleased with Castle Brennenburg, as he notes it's much nicer than anything around. He also notes that Alexander is well versed in worldly affairs, which makes sense, as if he's immortal, he would have all the time in the world to learn about anything. However, Daniel finds it strange that Alexander is pleased that he's here, even noting it's like he got here just in time. Just in time for what? After we pick up that note, there is yet another bruiser encounter, this one being pretty easy to dodge. However, by this point, Daniel's nyctophobia is in full effect, as we can barely see. The walls look like they are breathing, and our sensitivity is actually lowered, making it harder to play. All this to sell the idea that Daniel, in this very moment, is completely terrified. Entering a room, we can get many supplies such as oil, however, a glass jar. The only time we get jars is to make some sort of substance, and this is confirmed when we enter another room that is actually some sort of laboratory housing a bucket of acid. This, of course, being what we'll use to damage the lock. However, before that, a bruiser will actually break the door down in a scripted encounter, forcing you to scramble to find a hiding spot in an extremely intense moment. Filling up the jar with acid, we can now go melt the lock. However, before leaving this room, there is one last diary entry from Daniel that reads,
4th of August, 1839. The nightmares woke me in the early morning, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Shortly after, there was a knock on my door. Alexander had heard my screams and asked me to join him in the parlour. As we drank our tea, Alexander began to tell me what he knew. It seems like the orb I found casts a long and dark shadow. It's not only a powerful item, but a dangerous one. Simply by touching it, you invoke the powers within, and if you are too weak to control it, it will devour you. The shadow is a sluggish thing, lagging behind the wielder, killing anyone or anything in its path to reclaim the orb. I said I didn't care about its powers and that I should throw it away. Alexander advised against this, as I'd still be a part of the path to the orb and eventually suffer death. Having the orb, I would at least have the chance to fight back when the time came. I asked Alexander what he meant when he said he could protect me, and he answered that things can be done, but at a price.
We now know 100% it was the orb that caused this shadow, as Alexander, strangely being an expert on this topic, advises Daniel to keep it as it can help us fight against the shadow. This is all stuff anyone reading the note at face value would get. However, what's interesting is when Alexander says he can protect Daniel, that things can be done at a price. This is interesting as he isn't saying he will protect Daniel for a price, he's saying that things can happen for a price. Obviously, what Alexander is referring to that can happen is him being protected. But what is this price he's referring to? Leaving the room and going back to the padlock, we can now pour acid on it, putting it in poor condition, then using the hammer to break it. After breaking the lock, it initiates a chase sequence with a bruiser automatically knowing where you are. Normally this is a very tense chase sequence, however, I find it pretty funny if you just shut the door, the bruiser's AI just completely breaks and it loops an animation right in front of you. But running to the exit, it brings you to the next area of the game, that being the cistern. As we enter the cistern, we get an immediate flashback telling us we are in the sewer. Keen-eyed individuals will be able to see an oil leak on the wall, and if you have the glass jar from before, which I don't even know why I'm saying that because you'll have it, you can actually fill it up with oil. Taking this oil over to the lever allows you to lubricate it, letting you bang the ladder on the pipe till it breaks, allowing you to climb up the ladder. Going straight, you will enter a control room, which is very similar to the elevator maintenance room in the sense that it's just a bunch of machines. This room is one giant puzzle, as scattered around there are multiple pipes on the floor, all of which will be used to fix the control room. Entering the room on the right, you can find a bunch of wheels with what looks like weights attached to them. Lining them up with the similar weights in the room adjacent to this one, it will complete the first puzzle, causing the room to shake. Going to the only other room, you will find what looks like a giant piston with levers. Use those levers to push the piston down till it's fully done, completing that puzzle. After completing that puzzle, you can look on the table on the left, which will give you a wooden crank. Picking that up and going out of this room, we get a voice line from Alexander, but not a flashback. This time he's actually speaking to us.
Daniel, is that you? What are you doing?
Moving forward, ignoring Alexander, we can find another pipe, which is actually the last one we need. The other two are found in the two other puzzle rooms. Taking these pipes and putting them on the wall will finish this last puzzle, completing the section. As we go back, the knob to open the door actually breaks, which is why we were given the wooden crank. Going back out of the control room, if you noticed coming in, there were two levers on the door. They didn't work before, however, thanks to us fixing the control room, they now do. By pulling them, the two bridges you saw above will come down. One of them gets stuck, but one allows us through. The one that leads us through leads us to the second water area of the game. Remember the Karank from earlier, Kyrunk, the invisible water monster? Well, he's in this section. However, he's not as hostile as the first one, pretty much leaving you alone unless you take too long in the section. This part of the game's main goal is to just turn 3 valves to drain the water. It's a very simple section without much thought, so I'll just read the notable pieces of lore found in here. And spoiler alert, they're all from Daniel's diary.
7th of August, 1839. There is no denying that Alexander puts a lot of faith into what I can only describe as magic. I'm not surprised. Even while traveling across Europe, I assumed I would have to embrace the supernatural to save my mind and life. As a novice, I do everything in my power to stay focused and not dwell too much on my own doubts. Alexander woke me up early and told me it was time we got started on our work. He was obviously excited to get going, and we headed downstairs to the old dungeon, where he preferred to attempt his rituals. It turns out that Alexander is a true Renaissance man, paralleled only by Da Vinci, I'm sure. He showed me several rooms fitted for specific research, such as anatomy studies, alchemy, and botany. The crown of Brennenburg must be the inner sanctum, a most hallowed ground where we shall attempt to permanently banish the orb's shadow.
From this we learn what anyone with a brain could probably expect by now, and that's that whatever they're going to do to save Daniel is probably something supernatural, and that Alexander is weirdly excited to do it. Moving on, after turning the next valve, we can find the second diary entry that reads,
8th of August, 1839. I could never be certain until today that I was on the right path. Using my orb, Alexander managed to channel its power unto us. The inner sanctum flared with blue, fiery light, and I could feel the same things I felt in the dark chamber in Algeria. It was like standing in a mad whirlpool of impressions. It was terrifying, but Alexander kept calm and wielded strange tools of science in order to tame the storm. Suddenly, the blue light was stained by strains of red, and the walls burst with pulsating tissue resonating with the scene. Alexander quickly covered the orb in some cloth, and the unspeakable thing vanished. Apparently, the orb's shadow is closer than Alexander thought. He said I should prepare for a warding ritual tomorrow. I'm not sure what he expects, but I have a bad feeling about this.
This entry teaches us that Alexander is some sort of expert when it comes to the orb and how to wield its power. I mean, he knew how to tame whatever was going on, and he was also able to tell from that red fleshy stuff on the wall that the shadow was closer than Daniel and he thought, and that they should prepare for a warding ritual tomorrow, whatever that is. Turning the final valve, we get the final entry to the diary series, and as I've been doing, I'm just going to play the audio for it.
9th of August, 1839. It is still early, and Alexander is busy preparing for the ritual later today. Seeing him this worked up makes me question why. What does he stand to gain? I realize he is curious about it all, but surely there must be more. Is he so foolish he will attempt to tame the power of the orb? I must admit that yesterday, when Alexander flooded the inner sanctum with blue light, I realized we had but graced the orb's true potential. This might turn out to be more than escaping a creeping shadow. It might be the beginning of something truly extraordinary.
Daniel is rightfully skeptical. I mean, what does a noble baron who could have whatever he wants stand to gain by helping him? Daniel brushes this aside as, however he may feel, watching Alexander tame the orb's power made him forget all about that and focus on what's to come. Finishing this section, we head back to the sewer area with seemingly nowhere to go. Well, remember the broken bridge? Using a rock from below, you can throw it on the bridge, and the weight from the rock will cause it to collapse, allowing you entrance into the final room of this section.
Do you see, Daniel? It has yielded. What? The shadow. It has? For now. Come, let's get this out of here so we can get some peace.
Yes, let's. Where to?
Just down the corridor, to the morgue.
Are there more dead men there?
You did well, Daniel. Come, let's get going.
Welcome to the morgue. Entering, we get that flashback as you saw, where we learned Daniel has a fear of looking at dead bodies. This fear actually plays out in game. Looking at any dead body will cause Daniel to rapidly lose sanity. It's just a nice touch that the devs add. They didn't need to, but it's definitely appreciated. Finding a note on the table, we actually learn of an infestation of this poisonous fungi that's actually preventing our way through. And since we're in the morgue, chances are we're probably looking for something to help us with that. Moving forward, we find another one of Alexander's memory capsules. Normally, they're just rants about himself. Here, he's actually talking about Daniel, and it's kind of sad. I fear for Daniel, for he is reckless. He's tainted by the approaching shadow and will not be able to pass the gate. Will he be able to accept this in the end? My love, I see an evil in him. How am I to trust him with the truth? What cruel irony that I have to do unto him what Agrippa did unto me. What does this mean, we will not be able to pass the gate? Clearly this is a bad thing, as he does not know if we will be able to accept it. Even more crazy, he brings up that he will do to us what Agrippa did to him. This is scary, as we know back in a previous memory capsule, Agrippa entered the same gate, leaving Alexander behind, and it pissed him off. Clearly, Alexander wants to do the same to us, but currently, we just don't have enough information to understand what all of this means. Continuing forward, we find a note documenting vaccine trials and that they were successful on a few men, allowing them to interact with the fungi and enter the sewers without any issues. Alexander notes that an injection of vaccinated blood will work as a temporary vaccine to pass through the sewers, allowing anyone to go through. I'm sure you can guess what we're going to do. Taking your hand drill from before to the corpse on the table, we can drill into his skull, and putting the copper tube in you grabbed earlier, we can inject ourselves with his blood. Now we have a temporary vaccine, allowing us to leave and enter the fungi-infested sewers, but not before a bruiser so rudely bangs on the door, forcing us to hide. After the brief encounter with the bruiser, we can head back to the middle where now, because of the two previous rooms, the water blocking the sewer entrance is drained, and because of the morgue, we have our newfound immunity to the fungus, we can enter the sewers. Entering the sewers, we are greeted in true Amnesia fashion with a bruiser almost immediately, the only way forward being the mill that is spinning. Of course, stopping this is our objective for this part of the sewer. Making an immediate right, we can find a broken pipe that we can shimmy off the wall, and backtracking ourselves, we can go down the complete opposite way and find the engine room for the mill where we can slow it down. But of course, after slowing it down, you guessed it, a bruiser spawns in, and immediately you'll have to hide so that you don't die. You can just stay in the engine room and wait him out, or you can try to immerse yourself more and hide. Really, the choice is up to you. It doesn't matter either way. After he leaves, you can head to the now slowed down mill, shove the pipe in it, and it will stop, allowing you to move to the next section. Running through the next section, we make it to a room filled with the Shadow's signature fleshy wall crap, along with a mutilated corpse in the middle, presumably murdered by the Shadow. It's also to note that Alexander, after we enter this room, talks to us for the second time, telling us to turn around because the Shadow's with us.
Daniel, turn around this instant. You are carrying the Shadow with you.
It's interesting, is he more worried about us or the Shadow? But of course, before we get any time to think, the game spawns in a bruiser, forcing us to hide immediately. Going down the staircase, the final section has one last door and a bruiser guarding it. This is the only area in the game where you can't just hide from the bruiser and wait it out. You need to actively distract it. This is done by taking a rock, looping around, throwing the rock to attract the bruiser, then looping back the way you came and sprinting through the door. All in all, it looks like this. As you make it out, the game will trigger another chase sequence, this one being by far the most intense, as you need to run through multiple doors with its loud-ass scream right behind you. Eventually, you will find a ladder allowing you to climb up, finally finishing the sewer. Climbing up the sewer, you are greeted with 3 doors. Going to the left leads you down a hallway, then a staircase. Entering the door at the bottom of the staircase leads to another flashback between Alexander and, interestingly, Agrippa.
Agrippa, I need you to stay awake. Can you feel the syringe?
No, I can't feel anything. Alexander?
Yes.
Soon, I won't even be able to move, will I?
Your life is safe.
I don't doubt that. But will it be worth living?
It's clear Alexander and Agrippa used to be friends, but as we know from the memories of Alexander, something must have happened, as continuing straight forward, we find Agrippa, who is strung up asking for assistance.
Help me. Thank you. You have my gratitude.
Continuing straight, we find a room full of multiple cells, and weirdly enough, a piece of meat. Continuing even farther straight, we can enter the first room of the level. The first room is a big antechamber called the chancel. It has a scripted bruiser spawn along with a flashback.
Just a little further.
It's like Orpheus descending into the underworld.
Are you hiding something?
What do you mean?
Never mind. Your intuition is remarkable.
I'm not sure I'm following.
It doesn't matter. It's just a myth after all.
Going across the bridge and making a right, we find our first diary entry where we finally start getting answers to all the questions that have been building up.
12th of August, 1839. The banishment ritual is taking longer than expected, and we have to do what is needed. I spend my time helping out with the prisoners. Being around these degenerates makes me ill. None of them even tries to face their punishment with any kind of dignity. They taunt me with their lies of innocence and their cowardly pleas of mercy. What can make a man fall so far from the grace of a civilized existence? They are all wicked men, and I remind myself of it constantly. Still, I am thankful for God sending these monsters our way, as they will serve as the instruments of my salvation. I try to study the different tools in the torture chamber and learn how to use them effectively. Last time was messy, and the effect suffered from my inexperience. When the next warding is to be performed, I shall be ready.
So Daniel and Alexander use these prisoners as salvation, seemingly from the shadow, of course, but we don't understand how that works yet. They do this with some sort of ritual. Daniel is researching how to use torture devices more effectively. It only leaves the thought that Daniel and Alexander are torturing the people, and torturing them gives them something. Well, if you remember the note from the dog room, Alexander talked about torturing dogs to get some kind of energy. He specifically said humans produce it the best. It's very reasonable to assume that this is why they are doing it, or else why would they not be in the game? I mean, what? This is where the game starts to show us that Daniel isn't such a good guy. In fact, he might be quite evil. As you saw on screen before, we grabbed a bucket of tar, and that's all we can do in here. So now we're just going to head back. However, before we head back, we find a note on this table right here that reads, "All is lost. I must once again start over. Ever since I recovered the orb, first found by Agrippa, I've depended on it for my research. The incident with Wilhelm made me most impetuous, fearing a paucity of prisoners. I proceeded with the final ritual without proper foresight. The orb cracked and fell into 6 parts. I've tried everything, but have of yet to mend the thing. Unless I can think of a way to piece it together, I will have to find another. There is still life in the pieces, and even if the orb isn't restored, I might be able to salvage some of its power for some other purpose. Centuries have passed in vain, and I begin to wonder if I will ever be able to see my love again. How much longer can I sustain my life?" This is big. We now know that before Daniel, Alexander was in possession of an orb previously obtained by Agrippa. However, his use of the orb was imperfect, and it ended up shattering. It's important to note that Alexander at the end asks if he will be able to see his love again. Alexander clearly needs this orb to see his love, whether it be his kids or his wife. This makes no sense, as why would he need a mythical artifact to see his family? It just makes more questions. Heading back and going through the way we came triggers another flashback.
These cells are meant to hold prisoners who are under treatment. The people you send for will end up here. Remember that the confinement itself works as a preamble to the torture, and you should pace yourself. Don't take anyone before they are ready.
Understood.
Sounds from the torture chambers are shuttled in through those pipes in the ceiling. Manage your victims well, and let one prisoner's pain instill.
So Alexander taught Daniel how to torture people, going into great depth. He clearly has done this for a while, and now he's teaching Daniel. Tracing your way back through the nave, which is where you found Agrippa, that area basically serves as the hub for the game, you can find these 2 levers. Flicking them both opens doors back in the nave to 2 new sections. This room also has 1 diary entry that confirms every one of our suspicions.
9th of August, 1839. I can't stop sweating and shaking. The warding ritual was not something of a sane mind. I did not even realize the dungeon was still in use. Alexander had his servants bring one of the prisoners, a murderer, he told me. Alexander made all the arrangements, but he said I had to perform the ritual in order to have the right effect. The shadow could be led astray by the blood of another. Killing the man would provide us precious time. What else could I do? Alexander said it had to be done. He is saving my life. I don't have the luxury of argument.
Murder. That's how it works. To save one's life, they must take another. Only then will the shadow rest. It's really a terrible thing, as Daniel, who clearly does not want to do this, noted by his shaking and sweating, is forced to, or else he will die. It's a terrible moral dilemma that will only lead to ruin, and we will see that much later on. Now with the doors in the nave open, we can head back down. Alexander, now nervous we might actually reach him, starts to panic, telling us he's sorry, presumably sending enemies after us.
Daniel, you have gone too far. I have to stop you. I can't let you proceed any further. I'm sorry, my friend.
Putting the meat on this rope, we can send it down where something will bite it. Pulling it back up, we get a bone covered in some sort of mucus. It's of no use right now, but it will be very important later. Going through the adjacent door, we can enter the first real level of this area, the transept. Entering the transept, we get a flashback of Alexander preparing to torture someone. Daniel having this flashback means he must have been there.
Oh, Baron, how much more am I supposed to withstand? Kill me already! Kill me!
This one, prepare him.
Going up the obvious staircase, we enter what seems to be an office with a memory shard. Is it you, my love, I miss the most, or is it perhaps myself? I know what I have become. I am not blind. I am a monster to them, a demonic sultan perched on a dark mountaintop. There is little I can do to redeem myself. The Black Eagle fears me, and after Napoleon's defeat, it is only a matter of time before they will demand my head on a platter. I must remove myself from this land. This time it must work. If I can't return home now, I shall perish. This being Alexander's memory shows he knows what he's doing is bad. Could this suggest he's in the same boat as Daniel, needing to do this to save his life? Well, if you're watching the video, your answer would be, of course not. He's doing it so he can go see his family. The energy generated by the orb when people are killed can help Daniel and somehow allow Alexander to see his wife. Alexander says he must remove himself from this land and that he must return home now, and if he doesn't, he will die. Is it another country he's referring to, or somewhere entirely different? On that table, we can find a rope along with a note, one of the darkest notes in the game, and it reads as such. There are quite few things to be said about torture. I had figured that the reaction I would get from the victims would be highly individual. Thankfully, this is not the case. The humans all have a very similar approach to dealing with physical pain and the terror of anticipation. I can't stress enough the importance of restraining the victims before proceeding. Even the most timid creature can break out in fits of violence, where their strength exceeds their expected prowess. If proper care has been put into breaking the victim, this should not be a problem, but it will also hinder the effect I am after. The right steps to take are, therefore, to restrain the victim while he is still dazed. Proceed by presenting the form of torture you are about to apply, and then continue with the actual act. The point of presentation is to infuse terror. The human mind is extremely efficient, as it will trigger itself into greater fear simply by imagining it. While applying pain, make sure to avoid massive damage, as it will prove more efficient if the process can be sustained. Also apply the pain in doses, if possible with breaks to let the body settle. If you are whipping or cutting the victim, strike once, wait for the pain to subdue, then strike again. As long as the body suffers, it will continue to produce the vitae and saturate the blood with its properties. Only with careful performance will the victim yield maximum effect. If the victim doesn't behave as expected, it is likely that all will be for naught. Before this happens, feed them the amnesia drink and then try again later. It's vitae, that's the energy that powers the orb, and it's created from the blood of tortured humans. And what's even more fucked up is that they will torture someone, then wipe their memory with the amnesia potion, and then do it again, literally maximizing the amount of vitae they can generate. This is some seriously fucked up shit, but explains why the castle has a prison, a morgue, and a dungeon, all for the purpose of generating vitae. But there's something that's still not connecting. Heading back down, we can make a right. Entering the door and walking down the hallway, we are led to a grim sight, one of Alexander's torture rooms. the room itself being covered in blood, probably brimming with vitae. And what's even sadder, clicking on the torture device, we get a memory belonging to Daniel, describing exactly how they were tortured. This isn't just Alexander's torture room, it's Daniel's as well. Clearly it's had an effect on Daniel, as just being in here will drain your sanity extremely quick. Turning around, you can find what's surprisingly a piece of the orb. I don't know what an ancient mythic artifact is doing here, but guess what we're looking for now? The rest of the pieces. Entering the next torture room, we get a flashback.
The cradle is ready.
Good.
You're a man! How can you partake in this?
Is he all right?
He is one of the wicked. Don't pay his lies any attention.
I'm not a bad man! It was an accident!
He set a man on fire.
It wasn't my fault! Why won't anyone listen?
That's horrible.
Of course. We are dealing with monsters here.
Well, at the very least, we learned the people they're torturing are criminals, so that's something. And on the screen, you can also see Daniel finds the second piece of the orb in here. That's all there's to do in here, so I'm just breezing by it. Entering the next torture room, you guessed it, we find another piece of the orb. However, this time there's also a grate that by opening it and combining the glass jar and string, we can lower it into the grate and collect some of the blood. That finishes the transept, allowing us to leave, however, not before the shadow gets mad. Now, back in the nave, we can go to the next area, and the first thing we find is another memory shard. In court, the Order of the Black Eagle spew their policies at each other while I sit quietly in place, willfully forgotten. Once in a while, someone will notice me and lose themselves in a silent cower before regaining their senses. They all know I am the one and the same Alexander who helped their fathers and grandfathers to found this great order. I've seen them take their fathers' places, and they too will grow old and pass away, while I remain the same, aged not by time, but by anguish. The name keeps getting brought up, the Order of the Black Eagle. We keep hearing it now, and we know it's some form of government body that Alexander formed hundreds of years ago. How he states it's the same Alexander who helped their grandfathers found this order. It's interesting as to what he could be using this for. On the table, we find a note by Alexander that tells us a lot. Weyer taunts me from the other side. I trusted him with my true reason for my efforts, and still he insists on me releasing Agrippa. How an enlightened man can show such a lack of compassion in a seat of power disgusts me. I can't bring myself to part from Agrippa, as he is, and has been for centuries, my only link to the worlds beyond. Weyer claims he tries his best to release me from my banishment, but that he needs me to give him Agrippa first, so he too can help. If he could guarantee success, I would happily oblige, but how am I to part from him, if my return might be denied? I know what they are capable of. I have seen their deception. Optimism is a most hopeless feeling, but I must retain it. I shall prepare for his release. To release Agrippa without killing him, Weyer told me to feed him a tonic made from paralyzer, vitae, and tampter. The poisonous fungi should work as a paralyzer if I can find the internal gland from a large specimen. The choir seems to be a fertile grounds for this sort. I should then be able to extract its contents with the proper tools. The vitae could be extracted as usual from any agonized human victim's blood. I just need large amounts to distill it properly. Remember to collect this during the next torture session. Tampter, on the other hand, will prove more difficult. I don't think it exists in this world. Simply writing the word with these letters looks wrong. I believe it's a property of a secretion in the water-dwelling carink. I will have to address Weyer with this, as he will have to supply me with a host. Also, a properly prepared well should suffice to contain it. Alexander seems to be talking to Weyer. Remember him? He's the real-life occultist. Well, he is somewhere that Alexander is trying to reach, presumably the place where his love is. Alexander, referring to it as the Great Beyond, suggests it's a whole nother world that Alexander, Johann Weyer, and Agrippa are all from. Weyer, who seemingly made it back, is telling Alexander he needs Agrippa first, and then he will let him come. So Alexander makes a tonic that, when combining all of them, will allow Agrippa to be released. Clearly he hasn't done it yet, as Agrippa is still here. The ingredients of this tonic being fungi, vitae, and tampter, whatever that is. If you paid attention, we already have two of them, the vitae from the blood we collected in the torture room, and the bone from having tampter on it from the carink that bit it. Now we just need the fungi, and we can release Agrippa. Entering the choir, we can walk straight and turn right, and we can find a note. This note triggers a flashback, and we can finally see what these warding rituals looked like.
15th of August, 1839. The blood wards are failing. The shadow beckons, and its cry disarms my actions. Hurry. No time to spare. You have to kill another. Alexander produces a knife. He wants me to cut the flesh. Do it. Save yourself. He is a murderer, Daniel. He is evil. A cold-blooded killer. Hurry. Alexander, you must let me be. I have to concentrate. Paint the man, cut the lines, cut the flesh, watch the blood spill, let it come. Please, I didn't do anything. Paint the man, cut the lines, paint the man, cut the lines. Please, the man cries. Now you see. I did well. One life for another. You hear me, guardian of the orb? I did all this for you. Now, once more, withdraw your shadow from my domain. Alexander, there isn't much time. I can feel it. We must act swiftly. I will do whatever it takes.
Well, there's not really much to say about that. I mean, now we know what a warding ritual looks like. It really is as simple as kill or be killed. Entering the main choir hall, this area is special. It has a shit ton of bruisers. Not crouching or using your lamp will cause you to die. Exercise extreme caution throughout this entire area. Alexander talks to us, telling us our justice is misplaced and that it's our fault.
You only seek misplaced revenge. How do you justify your violence? Is it for the greater good? Are you doing the world a service? It is you who caused all this pain and death. If you had accepted your fate and submitted to the orb when you first discovered it, none of this would have happened. It is curiosity in league with your selfishness that is killing us both.
Alexander is trying to manipulate Daniel to leave, but at this point we've come too far. Making it to a door, we get a flashback talking of torture techniques, this being another torture room where Alexander gets into rather disgustingly precise detail, and Daniel, well, we see Daniel is truly fucked as well.
Tying limbs to the spokes and rim. All tools are by this point useful, and you may administer the torture in any way you like. But the forte of the wheel is the gaps. When you have decided that the victim shall die, you can smash their limbs with a hammer, making them fold in between the frame.
But they'll die. Too quickly, I mean.
No, don't worry. The human body is much more resilient. They can survive for days until they finally succumb.
If you're watching the video you saw on screen, we grabbed an orb piece. That's all there is to do in here. Just grab that piece and leave. Stealthing around the main hall again, we find a growing blue plant. Crushing it with the hammer, we get the fungi gland. This is the final piece for the tonic, and now we can craft it. Entering the room, we find a brazen bowl, but as well, you guessed it, an orb piece. Entering the final room, we find the last orb piece, as well as a cheap jump scare. Now, after almost shitting my pants, we can leave the choir, go back through the nave, and enter the final area, that being the chancel again. Now with the orb, we can finally enter the inner sanctum and finish this game. But before that...
Daniel. We are so very much the same, you and I. Did you really drink from the amnesia mixture? It does explain so much of your behavior. You never did finish what you set out to do. You talked about redemption, how you would face the old shadow and save our world and me. I will grant you another chance to redeem yourself. You can wait here and stop the shadow. Thank you, friend.
We learn Daniel drank the same amnesia potion that they use on their tortured humans, so that, like them, he will also forget. Also, we learn that Daniel was talking of redemption for himself, and how he would face the orb's shadow alone. All the torturing they had done must have finally caught up to Daniel, and he couldn't take it anymore, drinking the potion to spare his conscience. Alexander, fearing that we are getting too close to him, locked us in a cell, waiting for the shadow to just come and finish us off. The game's first ending is here, actually. If you don't break out of the cell and just let the shadow kill you, the game will end right then and there. But come on, is this really where you want Daniel's story to end? I'll answer that for you. No! Throwing a rock at the iron bar on the wall and using it on the adjacent wall, you can break out of the cell.
To redeem yourself, you can wait here and stop the shadow. Thank you, friend.
Breaking out of the cell, we are free to explore this little cell block where we can actually find the last note of the game that reads, "There is little left to say. I write solely to prevent myself from revisiting the memories of these last few days. If I am fortunate, I will fall asleep and time will pass without effort. I've begun to wean myself of my prison. When I first arrived, I felt like I was being buried inside a tomb, but now I feel the close walls comforting me. As long as I am in here, there is no pain. The walls protect me from the outside. I even laughed earlier as one of my wardens dropped the key down the pipes. It gave me hope for a second, thinking I could escape, if only I could somehow reach it from here. In my dreams, Alexander, I am king. In my dreams, I best you and escape your clutches, and return with all the knights of the realm carrying pistols and sabers. In my dreams." In a cell, we can find a wooden bucket that, when attached to the well in the middle, allows us to send it down and collect, you guessed it, a bucket of water. Using this bucket, we could put it in the pipe and flush the key out, this being the same key that the prisoner talked about in the note. Escaping the prison, we engage in a chase sequence with the shadow desperately trying to kill us, shaking the whole building to its core, and as we run, the music gets louder, emphasizing he's closing in. After taking a fairly linear path, we make it back to the nave. Entering the nave, we find a note that, when picking it up, causes Daniel to enter a trance, triggering another vivid flashback. This is probably the most important moment in the game, so if you're not, I'd pay attention.
18th of August, 1839. Tonight, we will unlock the power of the orb and ultimately banish the shadow hunting me. I feel it closing in on me, and I fear for my life more than ever. Just outside Altstadt lies a small settlement where Zimmerman, a dairy farmer, lives with his wife and 3 children. We took the coach, went there. Our visit was unexpected, and Alexander was able to strike Zimmerman down without alerting the others. As he went to take care of the farmhands, I began to look for the children. We should have more than enough prisoners to finish the ritual now.
It was never criminals that they tortured. Daniel and Alexander would kidnap innocent people, including women and children, bring them back to Brennenburg, and torture them for their vitae. After they tortured them, they would feed them the amnesia potion and do it all again. This is why we are in this situation. Daniel was so guilt-ridden with his sins, he couldn't deal with it anymore. So what does he do? He drinks the same amnesia potion so that he could have some peace. I don't know how he's even been living with himself to this point, but now with more context, we can see why Daniel's doing the things he's doing, why he wrote himself that first note all the way back in the beginning. In his eyes, this is the only way of redemption for undoing his sins, a trial by fire. Enough for now. We have a video to finish. Continuing on, we find a lab where, using all the ingredients we have collected, we can make the tonic Ware wanted Alexander to make. Taking the tonic to Agrippa's body, along with a bone saw found in the previous room, we can do exactly what you think we're going to do.
Quickly, office ahead! And then, whatever happens, get me through that gate.
Now with Agrippa's head, we can head back to the chancel where we were originally kidnapped. Sneaking past the bruiser, we find a very futuristic-looking electrical fence and a weirdly circular-shaped altar next to it. With the bucket of tar, we can place it in the altar, and now using our 6 orb pieces, we can reconstruct it. After reassembling the orb, a blue light shines, disabling the first part of security to the inner sanctum. However, we must backtrack now. Going left, we find a newly opened room with a diary entry from Daniel, that when reading it is the final piece of confirmation we need.
18th of August, 1839. I cannot believe what I have become. One of the girls escaped and I chased after her all the way upstairs. I hunted her down and... What is a life worth? How many lives can I take before I surrender my own? Sure, I would kill a murderer to save an innocent, but to kill an innocent to save myself? A cold-blooded murderer.
In a previous flashback, Daniel was sent after a child who escaped. He was successful in catching her. After finding her, Daniel had killed her. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for him. Daniel's psyche really couldn't take it anymore. He just sees himself as a murderer and doesn't think it's worth it to save himself anymore. I mean, truly a tragedy when a man breaks all his morals and no longer has a sense of right and wrong. But Daniel's come to the realization that there's still time left. I mean, what is success without failure? What is salvation without struggle? As you just saw, by throwing a rock at the machine, we can disable the last layer of security to the inner sanctum. Now we can finally finish this and earn our redemption. Entering the inner sanctum, we can find multiple altars, probably from Mithric mythology, that require us to draw our blood in order to pass through. However, in the first room, we find the last diary entry of the game, finally giving us the answer to one last question. Why does Daniel want to kill Alexander?
19th of August, 1839. It's not fair. I'm not to blame. I've been manipulated by that demon. He played my guilty conscience and duped me into facing the shadow alone. That vile, conspiring man. He expects me to meet my death as he steals power beyond imagination. Alexander, I will kill you for what you have done. If only the shadow had caught me in London or Algeria, I wouldn't have to suffer this humiliation. You made me a murderer. A monster. And now, I merely await my death. I am too weak to press on. I can hardly stand as my knees fail me. I cannot see as my eyes are dressed in tears. I am as broken as the men I've tortured. If only I could wipe my fear away, as we did with them.
Alexander was never going to save Daniel. He was going to charge the orb with the Vitae they gathered together and leave, to return to his homeworld with the orb and leave Daniel to die, as with no orb there's no defense against the shadow. Daniel, being furious, wants to kill Alexander for this, as he has manipulated him into becoming a killer. But alas, Daniel's too emotionally unstable to do anything at this point, so to wipe away those emotions, he drinks the Amnesia potion, segueing straight into when the game starts. We finally have all the backstory, we understand it all. With all of that out of the way, let's press forward and find our salvation. Giving our blood to the 2 altars and standing on the stars on the floor, we can enter the orb chamber, finally coming face to face with the man himself.
I was wondering if you were going to show up. I see Agrippa convinced you to run some errands. Tell me, is everything nice and clear now? Am I the villain? Good and evil. Such comforting concepts, but hardly applicable.
Alexander has the 3 pillars set up with the orb in the middle, channeling all of the energy to, as revealed from one of the first memory capsules, open the gateway back home. If it isn't clear already, Alexander is from another dimension, and he's about to open the gate to go home, leaving us stranded. What's really hard about this point is this was the only way for Alexander to get home. He needed to torture people to charge it. As sick and twisted as it is, Alexander isn't really a bad guy. He just wants to go home. Is that really that evil of a thing? I mean, that's up for you to decide, but for me, we were playing as Daniel, and as Daniel, I could give less of a fuck about what Alexander wants. This guy's been such a dick, I just want him dead. By pushing over the 3 pylons, the Shadow comes in the room and murders Alexander, and this is where the game ends, and we get our final cutscene.
It was my greatest triumph, and I never looked back. You think I was afraid, fleeing Brennenburg? Huh. Quite the contrary. I knew it was my purgatory, hellfire made to wash away my sins. There's no denying the things I've done, but I have paid my tribute. I gave them that awful man. I did the right thing.
By going through the events of the game, Daniel, in a sense, has been freed of his wrongdoings, the Shadow sparing his life in exchange for Alexander. Daniel refers to this as a purgatory, which, if you do not know, is basically a place in early Christian literature that exists between heaven and hell, its purpose being to cleanse the soul of sins to allow it into the kingdom of heaven. The game itself being our purgatory, Daniel even stating that he has done the right thing, and with that, he gets to leave. He can go on to do whatever he wants now. He has a clean slate, a fresh start, and most importantly, a pure soul. However, Daniel is still a killer, and some of you may believe that there is no redemption for a man like Daniel, who's done horrendous things in selfish interest. If that's you, there is an ending for you. By waiting for Alexander to open the portal back home and throwing Agrippa's head in, the Shadow will come and kill both Alexander and Daniel, ridding the world of both evils. After we die, we hear Agrippa's voice from the great beyond, pleading with what is Johann Weyer.
There he is. Do you see him, Weyer? He deserves so much more. Please, help him. I know you can. Don't worry, Daniel. It will be all right.
Weyer and Agrippa, now beings that exist outside of reason, are most likely going to give Daniel a second chance somehow. In this ending, Daniel made the ultimate sacrifice to clear his own conscience and purify his soul in a more conventional way, that being self-sacrifice. Either ending you choose, we follow Daniel chasing salvation, and depending on what you believe, achieving it. This game wants you to know that no matter what you have done, it's not the past that matters. You can move forward and make up for it, change your current ways and become a new man. Endure those trials in your life, whatever it may be. If you're suffering from withdrawal, endure it. If you're suffering from violent urges, endure it. Whatever it may be, endure the hell, as in the end you will come out strong. And most importantly, when you're on your deathbed, whenever that may be, taking your last breaths, you can think to yourself, I did the best I could with what I had. I made good out of a shitty situation, and hopefully you can die with no regrets. Alright, that's going to be it for the video. This was my second one I've made, and the support on the first one made me so happy. So if you watched my Black Ops 2 video and watched this one, seriously, thank you so much. And the people who only saw this one, thanks a ton as well. You guys are awesome, and I can't wait to do this in the future. And with that, I'm going to go play Stalker 2.